Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the final session of the Spring 2021 NSF Grants Conference. So this session is all about answering your questions that are related to proposal and award policy. So hopefully you've attended a number of the sessions throughout the week, and maybe you thought of a question after that session concluded, and this is your opportunity really to get those questions answered. I do want to let you know that we do have a lot of people in the session, so it's possible we may not be able to get to all of them. But what I am going to do as we get started here is I'm going to put some resources in the chat for you where you may find some answers to some of your frequently asked questions. So I am joined today by a number of my colleagues in the policy office who are going to be with us today and answering questions. And I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Samantha Hunter in the policy office, and I'm very happy to be here today to answer some of your questions. Thank you for joining us.
And I am Beth Strausser, also in the policy office, and it is wonderful to be here with you all today.
My name is Jean Feldman. I'm delighted to be here as well. I am also in the policy office with my other policy office colleagues, and we hope that we can answer as many questions as possible today, and so that you leave away this session with information that you can use to do your jobs every day.
So my colleagues Samantha and Beth are going to disappear in a moment, and they're going to go and they're going to be answering questions in the Q&A. So please do look at the Q&A, because some of those questions they'll be answering live there in writing, and then Jean and I are going to be, I'm going to be asking some questions here on camera for all of you. So with that, while I should also note that we received a number of advanced questions, and we're going to start off with some of those, and then we're going to be monitoring the Q&A, and we're going to get to your questions that are being submitted live as well. So why don't we get started? And Jean, so I'm just going to go down the list of some of the questions that we've received in advance. And the first question is, what if two planned proposals have total time exceeding 2 months? Will both proposals be returned without review?
Well, this is a question that we get a lot, so thank you for whoever submitted that question. In response to that, no, there is actually an expectation that there will be numerous pending proposals at any given time. And they are just that, pending. You don't have NSF support that would impact the 2-month limitation of NSF faculty salary. So, and it's also why, as a best practice, a program officer requests updated information regarding current and pending support prior to issuance of an award. So the answer is absolutely not. They will not be returned if you have two pending or planned proposals that have total time exceeding 2 months.
Okay, the next question we have is, if you are not a prime awardee from NSF, but rather a sub-awardee from a prime awardee, are you limited to the de minimis rate of 10% for indirect costs?
We actually have been getting questions about this issue quite a bit lately. Not sure why, but the reality is, it's, as stated in the current PAP guide, it's NSF's expectation that NSF grantees will use the subrecipient's applicable U.S. federally negotiated indirect cost rate. If there is one available, that is what they should be using. However, if no such rate exists, the grantee can either negotiate a rate or use the de minimis indirect cost rate recovery of 10% of modified direct costs. So let me just state it one more time, is that it is our expectation that where there is a negotiated rate, that is what will be used in the subaward budget.
Okay. Next question is, if a PI does not have results from prior NSF support, should that section be omitted from the project description, or should it be somehow acknowledged therein?
Well, that section is really obviously applied to PIs and co-PIs who have prior NSF support that meet what's stated in that section of the project description. Believe it or not, folks, NSF does actually know whether you have prior NSF support. Our systems tell us that. So the section can be admitted. Some PIs feel very comfortable, though, just making an affirmative affirmation that they do not have. And certainly it would not be returned if you included that statement.
Okay, I'm going to go to one of the questions that was just submitted. If a postdoc is the PI or co-PI, is a postdoc mentoring plan needed for the proposal?
Okay, so that's a great question as well. The answer to that is that if the individual, the postdoc, is on the proposal as a PI or co-PI, submission of a postdoc mentoring plan is not required. Some institutions opt to submit them anyway, but the requirement is that it is not needed if you are identified as a PI or co-PI on the project.
Okay. Next question also coming in from our viewers here. Can you talk about the restriction on allocating more than 2 months effort a year for PIs?
Okay, so that is, you may be funded or you may include on the budget up to 2 months across all of your NSF awards, 2 months time, and that is for the 1 year period. And the 1 year is defined by the institution. Now, what some folks don't see is that we go on to say, however, that if you believe that you absolutely need more time than that, you need to justify it in the budget justification. And then if it's approved by the program officer in the approved budget, then you are actually able to have more than the 2 months. But let's make it very clear. This is all about at the time of proposal submission. If after an award is made and there is a need to do so, you can rebudget to include more time for the PI or co-PI. It definitely makes sure that it doesn't encompass a change in objective or scope by making that change. But the 2 month policy is strictly enforced at the time of proposal submission. And then if needed for the project and essential, they can rebudget. Again, there can't be a change in objective or scope, but they can have more than that 2 months. That's what the policy is, as stated in the PAP guide, salaries and wages section.
So can NSF confirm that it is unallowable for the PI, for the lead PI to devote effort to a project without receiving salary? For example, a PI has budgeted and devoted 1 summer month to the project, but wants to allocate salary to other budget categories while still devoting the same time to the project. The university interprets this as cost sharing.
Well, let's get back to one of the most fundamental misunderstandings about cost sharing. First of all, for it to be, our policy is about, in terms of what's a violation and what's not, is that it is really all about voluntary committed cost sharing. For it to be voluntary committed cost sharing, it has to be on the budget. You cannot put time and $0 on the budget. So you'll have to take that PI or co-PI off. What you then do is report it in facilities, equipment, and other resources, and that becomes voluntary uncommitted cost sharing. And an institution is allowed to do as much voluntary uncommitted cost sharing as would like. I got a question the other day is, well, wait a minute, you said that if there was $0, they put it in facilities, equipment, and other resources. But then you said they have to put the amount of time that they would devote to the project in the current and pending support section. We think this is confusing and we don't understand. So you are either going to have the amount of time on the budget that they are asking for funding from NSF, or if there is no funding, it will appear in facilities, equipment, and other resources. But we also tell you, you have to report the proposal being submitted on current and pending support. But what we want there is something different. What we want there is, it's not about how much time is being requested, being compensated by NSF, or even if it's in facilities, equipment, and other resources. Current and pending support is how much time will it take the faculty member to carry out their scope for the project. That's what current and pending support is all about. It helps us address capacity and overlap and duplication. And that is a different use of that information on how much time is going to be compensated by NSF, or in the case of this question, or not. It would appear in the facilities, equipment, and other resources section. So I'm hoping that that clarifies the questions about this issue, because each section of the proposal, sometimes the information appears in multiple places for different uses. And that's precisely the case with the budget, current and pending support, and facilities, equipment, and other resources.
Okay, can you please state where URLs are allowed in the proposal? The PAP guide says they must not be included in the project description, however, are allowed in publication references or products. But what about other documents such as the data management plan and mentoring plans, for example?
Okay, so the idea is, one of the reasons we took such a hard place on this with regard to URLs is that some faculty members set up a page for their research, and they will then put, they then would put the URL in the project description. Well, if they put the URL in the project description and a reviewer accesses it, they know precisely who is reviewing their proposal. So NSF took the hard step of saying, for the project description, you may not include URLs. You may include URLs, for example, in the biographical sketch, and we state that's the case, because what that URL is taking them to is a product to assess. This is demonstrating the 5 related to the project and 5 other products. Demonstrate your ability, that you have the capability to carry out the project that's proposed. You also can include them in other places like the data management plan, particularly if that's about managing the data. What we again want to avoid are circumstances where something is set up solely for this purpose, and then a reviewer would inadvertently let them know that they're reviewing that proposal. So that's the behind the scenes, but definitely project description is out, BioSketch is in, and as long as it's not demonstrating the links you're putting in the data management plan. And the reason actually I'm taking a step back, I'm dialing it back, and the BioSketch, we clearly state that. There is a page limitation on data management plan, and that would just throw out the window completely the ability to actually have a page limitation. So I would argue you cannot put it, you can in biographical sketches, because that's taking you to a publication or a product that a reviewer needs to see. Other than that, all bets are off for any limitations we place on that. So no for data management plan as well.
Okay. Going back to some of the questions we received in advance as well, is an IRB required at the time of proposal submission, or can this be submitted at a later date?
Absolutely. NSF has had a long-standing policy with regard to both IRBs as well as IACUCs, that you would enter the date of the IRB approval covering the proposed work, if such approval has been granted prior to proposal submission, and you put that in the space provided. If, however, you don't have that IRB date prior to submission, and it is absolutely okay if you do not. You would indicate pending and the space provided for the approval date. So absolutely, an IRB approval is not required at the time of proposal submission.
Okay, and when should you submit a separately submitted collaborative proposal as opposed to a proposal with subawards?
With regard to that question, occasionally, not often, but occasionally, NSF itself will make the determination. Many times for large facilities, we want one person in charge, and one organization to manage that project. So we would tell you that it must be done via a prime subaward relationship for those collaborations. If it is not specified in the program solicitation, you as an institution can determine what works best for you and your collaborators. NSF, unless it specifies in the solicitation, has made no statement that one is better than the other, and it's up to the collaborating organizations to determine whether a prime sub is best or separately submitted collaboratives are best.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, so it's sometimes difficult to manage these, especially on the fly, and I'm sure everyone can appreciate that. Okay, so there seems to be a lot of confusion regarding the second half of the new current and pending support form. I think they're referring to the fillable format, but I'm not sure here.
Yeah.
Will we consider holding a future webinar on just this new requirement?
Well, it's the bottom part that, I mean, if you're talking about because the various data elements are pretty much specified. If I could get greater clarity on the specific data elements, I would be more able to answer that. I will tell you that the current and pending support form is currently under development to add the new requirements for the PAP guide. And so we will be doing a lot of outreach on current and pending support as part of the changes when the PAP guide is rolled out. And we could certainly address issues based on the templates themselves. And we would be happy to do that. Again, just need clarity on the confusion specifically that you're talking about.
Right, and we certainly will be doing webinars when the new PAP guide comes out, and we'll be covering all of the new aspects of the current and pending in those webinars.
Okay.
And outreach that we do.
Absolutely, and the new categories that basically talk about the overall objectives of the project and a statement regarding overlap duplication. We will be covering those in detail as well.
Okay, a question on subawardees. Are subaward PIs considered senior personnel? If not, are biosketches required for them, and do they go in the supplementary documents?
If someone is considered senior personnel and the institution makes that assessment, it's the PI, co-PI, faculty, typically that's what we define that as. You have to follow all the requirements that are identified, and our compliance checks will ensure that you are including those for any individual identified for senior personnel. That includes collaborator and other affiliations, the BioSketch, and current and pending support.
Okay, the question we have is about success rates, and she writes, in the presentations this week, I've noticed a lack of stats on success rates. Where can we find this type of information? I think some of that information can be found in the merit review reports submitted to the National Science Board, and we can drop a link to that in the chat for everyone.
Absolutely, and there's a deliberate reason in terms of ensuring that the information goes out is accurate and is put in context. So that information was actually even often included in context statements, and we have moved away from context statements to process statements that literally just provide the information about how that proposal was reviewed. So actually that's by design to ensure that information is not going out that is not supposed to go out, which is why the merit review report is probably one of your best documents.
Okay, and I just dropped a link to that in the
That's
chat
great.
for everyone.
That's great.
Are fringe benefits an allowable expense on participant support stipends? I guess they're participant support costs.
Right. No, the costs are basically in the subsistence, travel, other. There are the basic categories, and there are no indirects permitted typically on participant support costs, period.
Okay, person is asking, how should we calculate the 2-month salary? We calculate it based on a 10-month academic year. Is there a single way that institutions
No, there
should
is
be doing
not a
that?
single way that institutions should do it in accordance with how they compensate. And if it's 2-person months, that whatever approach they use, all we ask is that you do it consistently.
Okay, we have some questions on project reporting, asking what role do annual and final project reports play for the program officer?
Well, they're a huge importance. We tell you specifically for our continuing awards that we give you more money subject to availability of funds. Obviously, we got to have the money to do that, as well as progress, sufficient progress. And the project reports are a communication between a PI and their program officer at NSF to talk about all the things that they've done on that project. They could potentially be used in other ways, for example, for a faculty member who on the budget indicated they wanted compensation to be able to include 25 graduate students. The project report comes in and there are no graduate students being supported. That's the kind of interest. Also a direct connection between what you said you were going to do, which by the way, there's a lot of flexibility there, but the expectation is that the program officer, if they don't see something that looks right, they are certainly going to ask the PI the questions about that. And really these project reports, I mean, I hear a lot of folklore. They aren't used by NSF a lot at all. Why are we requiring all this information? I'm here to tell you that's absolutely incorrect. That information is vital for us to understand what is going on with a given award. And to the extent that there are even issues, that is provided in those reports as well. So they are vitally important to our understanding of the current status of that award that was made as it relates to what was actually submitted in the proposal.
Okay, and then continuing along those lines with project reporting, since PIs submit their own annual and final reports, how can the sponsored projects office know that they have addressed a change in other active support?
Well, I mean, again, the issue is that these are communications from program officers between the PI and program officers. And we understand that there may be a desire by the sponsored projects office to make sure that they fill those out completely. But what we hold the person to is the fact that, believe it or not, and some institutions actually don't require them to come through the sponsored projects office, meaning for sign off, because as you know, our systems require it to come from the PI. But the bottom line is it's the PI certifies to the accuracy of the information provided in those project reports. So it is vitally important for folks to understand that that's what that information is used for, because a program officer needs to be able to assess, and what that's really provided for is that other support they've received either since the submission of the proposal or submission of the last annual report, is this new other support going to impact their ability to carry out the project that's proposed? So it's a capacity issue. And that is what the purpose of that information, which is why we ask it for directly from the PIs and co-PIs.
Okay, if someone is applying as a PI or co-PI and they were supported in the past as a grad student, do they need to identify this past NSF support?
We actually define as part of this, and one of the things that we actually talk about is fellowship support, particularly GRFP. So if they did receive direct funding from NSF for that kind of support, they would still provide it and now they've reached the level of PI, co-PI. Again, there is the 5-year parameter. So that may indicate that things drop off. But for someone who has moved up fast and furiously, and they actually are a PI or co-PI, and they have had that support, they would need to provide that.
Okay, the question here is, are international subawardees allowed to request the 10% de minimis rate?
Well, we actually say in terms of international, that the actual rate, the 10% rate can be used. If they have, and there are a few out there, if they do have a US federally negotiated rate, that can be used. If no such rate exists, the grantee should fund the foreign recipient using the de minimis indirect cost rate of 10% of modified total direct costs. So they either have a US negotiated rate, most don't, but a few do. If they have that, you use that. If they don't, you use the de minimis 10%.
Okay, here's a question about research.gov. Somebody is asking about the proposal classification form. They've submitted a few bio proposals via research.gov that would normally require this form, but it wasn't available as it is in FastLane. So this person was advised to contact the help desk. Can you talk a little bit more about research.gov and this form?
Yeah, it is, and it's the bio classification form that we're specifically referring to. And for purposes of this initial part of the research.gov implementation, the bio directorate made the case that they would not be using and implementing it in research.gov. Since that time, the bio directorate has relooked at that response and has decided that they do need the bioclassification form. So it ultimately will be added back to research.gov. We have a very, very detailed implementation process for every single part of when things must be done, and that's not there yet. The DUE form, by the way, is not there yet either. So, but they will be, the bioclassification form will be added back to research.gov.
Since we're on the topic of research.gov, can you advise when all solicitations will be available in research.gov and when FastLane might be phased out completely?
Well, let me use this as an opportunity to beg, and I really am begging. The numbers, we keep rolling out more. Bio directorates are definitely trying to get on board. We've met with all of them about how to get them moving their solicitations in to RGov. But the numbers are still not great. We're still only at about a 20% rate. And we don't think that's high enough for where we are now. So we made the commitment in the important notice that by the end of 2022, it didn't say calendar year, it didn't say fiscal year. So by the end of 2022, But we currently are working very hard to make sure that we continue to move forward. But we do know that many institutions in our surveys have told us, we won't use RGov until you make us use RGov. So I'm here to, there isn't a date yet that I can give you because we're just not there yet, but I'm begging you to have faculty, advise your faculty, or there are a few faculty members on this, please use it. It's got so much more capability and will help you more fully comply with NSF requirements due to a lot of additional compliance checks that have been put in play. Sorry, I can't give you a specific date at this point because that date has not yet been decided.
Okay, we're being asked if NSF plans to increase the size of the other significant products section of the BioSketch template.
Yeah, the answer is yes. We will. We've got a new PAP guide. In fact, after this session is over, I get to have a lovely meeting with the Office of Management and Budget to talk about the package that we submitted to them. But as part of that activity, it was made very clear that that part of the BioSketch needs more space. And so they're working on increasing it for the next PAP guide release so that we make sure that it meets people's needs.
Okay, we're being asked if your current and pending total more than 12 months in a given year.
Well, the current and pending support is a moving target, folks. You are putting planned, pending, active awards. But if indeed you've got a clear indication that you have, 12 months, trust me, reviewers see that. NSF program staff see that. So it is something to factor in to an understanding. We're not talking about pending. Pending, unfortunately, while it's lovely, for our purposes is just that, it's pending. And we see a lot of pending proposals on people's current and pending support. It's where it actually meets funding. And you say, I've got all this time, I'm already booked up. And oh, by the way, it's going to take me 4 months to be able to complete the project as proposed. Well, that's an obvious question for the program officers and reviewers is, how can they do that? They're overcommitted. So that's what we want to make clear people understand. Depends on what category of reporting that they are in.
Okay. For the results from prior NSF support section, can a PI or co-PI report on an award they are a co-PI on and not the PI?
Yes, absolutely. It's
Okay.
PI or co-PI. And if the co-PI is on an award or has NSF support as described in that section, they should absolutely report that.
Okay, this is with respect to current and pending support, number of person months. Is there a consistent way to calculate these? There is an option to use calendar or academic year. If you are a sub-awardee, does it need to be reported consistently with the prime also?
Well, I mean, obviously, I would hope that you have consistent reporting standards. What we tell you is that whatever you do, use the same consistent standard to report to NSF. And obviously that would hold true for a sub-awardee as well.
Okay.
And by the way, the sub-awardee's individual would have to be a PI or co-PI or senior person identified for them to even have to report. So I just wanted to add that bit of clarity.
Okay, being asked in cases where cost sharing is mandatory on NSF proposals, where should faculty time that would be contributed as cost share be reflected on their current and pending support form? Would it be in the proposal project section or the in-kind contributions section?
bottom line is there isn't one right answer to that. We just want to make sure that under current and pending support, and again, it's not the PI's time that they're requesting from NSF. It's how much time it would take them to complete that project scope. That's what we're really interested in. Mandatory cost sharing, which by the way, folks, we're down to like 5 or 6 programs. There's not a lot of mandatory cost sharing programs out there, but where there is and where the PI's time is that contribution, what you would be putting on current and pending support is, and it could be an in-kind contribution. Some might classify it as it's cash because that's our cash contribution. But so either one, actually, I don't think we care which one you report it as, so much as you tell us what are the number of months that it will take you to complete that scope. It's less important how much time that equates to in meeting the cost share requirement. What we want on current and pending support is the time it will take you to do that, because that impacts capacity.
Okay, and a follow-up to the cost share question, can a collaborator provide voluntary cost share in the facilities section?
Yes, they could, if that is a, we have rules for unfunded collaborators, and then we have rules for, these are people that are essential to the project. You would put them in facilities, equipment, and other resources. So yes, that is, the answer is yes to that. But remember, that's voluntary uncommitted, not voluntary committed cost sharing.
Okay, going back to the 2 months salary policy, because we always get questions on this all the time.
I know.
Could you address how this applies to non-academic, nonprofit organizations?
Well, I mean, overall, the 2-month rule is really across the board for institutions unless the solicitation specifies otherwise. So what that means is what you're putting on the budget is how much compensation that you want from NSF. You get 2 years across all NSF funded project. There isn't a different set of rules for non-academic unless the solicitation specifies otherwise and what you should do otherwise. But what you're really asking for is to put what you're asking for compensation for. And if you want more than 2, you've got to be able to justify it so that a program officer can make an assessment of whether they're going to grant such a request.
Can supplies for participants be included with those those costs, or should they be always with the other direct costs and not listed as participant support?
Well, if there are supplies directly necessary for the participant, and in many cases they would go in the participant support section. If they're general supplies for the project, they would go in other direct costs. But if they're truly for the participants, and many times they are, you would put it in the participant support section.
Okay. If a PI has already received all of the compensation budgeted and is entering into a no-cost extension, are they able to charge additional effort during the no-cost extension period?
Yes, they are, because we fully understand that there may be time necessary that goes beyond finishing that project, writing the report, finishing up the data analysis. And so, yes, there is time that can be requested during a no-cost extension. I realize it's no-cost extension, but they can charge to the award those types of costs, absolutely.
Okay. Can you clarify which documents a review panel sees and which ones they will not see from the documents submitted as part of the proposal?
Okay, so that's really easy. So we have a set of documents that we call single copy documents. Those include your certifications, your COA documents, which we use to help manage the review process. The reviewers do not see those. They do not see any single copy document. They see the rest. So yeah, that's how an easy indicator of what reviewers are going to see. They're going to see what's submitted as part of the proposal submission, but not the single copy documents.
Okay, is release time permitted? That's the question.
The answer is check the guidance in 2 CFR 200, which specifically addresses what you have to use to budget for release time, because it's different than what it has been prior to implementation of 2 CFR 200. I would encourage you to look closely at what that language states.
Okay. When applying to an NSF fellowship, should a postdoc or grad student report current support if their salary is currently covered by an award to their faculty mentor?
Well, we have two kinds of fellowship programs. We have graduate research fellowship program, the flagship for our graduate student process. Those are applications. They are not proposals. And they are very different. You got your reference letters, you have your transcripts, you have your statement of research. Just put what is there. Now, our postdoc fellowship programs are a bit different. We are actually preparing the faculty member for their writing their first research proposal to NSF. And so basically the rules apply across the board in our basic proposal process are typically applied also to those postdoctoral fellowship programs. So they would be reporting in current and pending support.
Okay, this person apologizes for being late and but asks a good question and something that bears repeating for everyone. When do we expect the new PAP guide? When can we expect it? And can you talk about the timeline a little bit?
Okay, so we changed this year, okay? So we are moving, or actually last year, we are moving to no, we didn't change last year. We effectively transitioned for this year. So we are transitioning to a different time frame. Before we would get the comments in the summer, resolve them, put the PAP forward to OMB, and it would be posted in October and implemented, because we always give you 90 days, in January. We have moved to coincide with the fiscal year. So we posted the PAP guide for public comment in December. We gave you 60 days. Thank you very much. We got a lot of very excellent feedback. We resolved that feedback, and now the document is at the Office of Management and Budget. It is our great hope, and a lot of this depends on action from OMB, that we would post the PAP guide July 1st with an effective date of October 4th, 2021. But again, we need to get clearance from OMB, but that is the time frame that we are working on now. And we're incredibly enthusiastic to get this out to you, because there are some very good, important enhancements that we have made to both many parts of the document, but in particular to the biographical sketch and current and pending support.
Okay, let's see here. If a PI is working on a project and someone from their department helps them with, say, an event, would they be able to pay them even if the person that helped them with the event is not on the current budget?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. And they would, I mean, obviously, if there are costs associated with that, and they were not envisioned at the time of proposal preparation and submission, they could do that, understanding that those are the kind of things, those kind of costs that just kind of appear from nowhere. our IG loves to look at those kind of issues. But the bottom line is, if they actually aren't on the budget, but they have spent time and effort to do the work scope, they could charge those costs, but make very, very, very clear in your documentation just what that was and why it was done that way. Document,
Okay.
document.
How does NSF distinguish the difference between subsistence on participant support and per diem? Can participants receive both at the same time?
I'd have to have more information about what the difference would be in those two categories to really be able to answer that question. The reality is, there are many ways subsistence, the food, the kind of thing that they would get, can be done multiple ways. If it's a big conference, there could be a food contract, in which case subsistence per diem doesn't come up at all, because they've got a contract support for that conference that the institution has made provided whatever kind of agreement they use to pay that. That would be in another part of the budget. But I would need a little more differentiation between what is meant by both to more fully answer that question.
Yeah, it might be good to kind of talk a little bit about when you do have questions that are either specific to a program solicitation or specific to an award or a general policy question. Where should people go to ask those questions?
That's great, because we clearly, based on what we do every day, and that's the royal we, Paula Knox, Beth Strouser, Samantha Hunter, spend a good portion of their day answering questions. So we answer solicitation specific questions. Some we may field to the program if it's very technically oriented, but if it's the requirements of a solicitation, you could come to policy at nsf.gov. If it is general policy questions, you come to policy at nsf.gov. If it is post-award, meaning an award is in place, if you submit it to policy at nsf.gov, the first thing we're going to do is move that to our colleagues in the Division of Grants and Agreements, because once an award is in place, that's kind of our dividing line of what we answer and what we do not. And just as an important point of interest, whenever you come up with I have a hypothetical question. There are very few hypotheticals. We know that. Most are, you just don't want to say that you have that question. So, bear that in mind when you're submitting the question, so that we can more clearly answer the question that you really do have.
Great. A question on post-award disclosure of current support and in-kind contribution information. The question is this only support undisclosed at the time of the proposal submission, or current support in effect at the time of award that wasn't disclosed at the time of proposal submission?
This is a great question, because I'd like to parse it out a little bit. So we implemented on October 5th, 2020, a new requirement that says if the institution finds out that current support, and it's current support, it's not pending, current support should have been made available to NSF but was not, the AOR has 30 days to notify NSF, and the term and condition tells exactly what kind of information that's needed. So it's that term and condition is only if it should have been disclosed but was not. Then we also have, starting October 5th, 2020, the new requirement to report other support for PIs and co-PIs on a project. And they would submit that as part of their annual reports, because that, again, as I talked about before, often helps us understand whether indeed there are capacity or duplication issues. Now let's talk about that interim period. You've submitted the proposal. You have new other support, but an award hasn't been made. So what do you do then? Well, many times, and it is certainly a best practice at the National Science Foundation by program officers, they almost all do it. If there is perhaps an award that is going to be made and they're making those final decisions, they almost always ask for an updated current and pending support. And that would be the opportunity for the PI to update that information based on the fact that it wasn't there in place at the time the proposal was submitted, but a couple of those pending turned into awards, and they would then identify those as new other support. Now, there's one other piece I'd like to mention, and that's that if the PI doesn't get such a PI or co-PI gets such a request, and you're like, well, we just have some things we want to update on it. Well, there is actually part of the PAP guide that talks about revisions during the proposal process, where they say, we tell you that if there is a significant development, such as absence of the PI, and we give some examples, but you feel like this information is vital to NSF understanding, then you can use that vehicle as well. So again, we have got at time of proposal submission, if asked by a PI or co-PI, the revision section, and then your basic update to other support occurs as part of the annual reporting process. Great question, though.
I'm going to go back to current and pending support. The current and pending support FAQ says that the information is intended to help NSF assess the capacity of the individual to carry out the research as proposed. But if we are reporting all of their planned time, whether or not the individual is being supported on their own grants, their current and pending will reflect that they are occupied for 12 months per year, thus devaluing it as an assessment tool. So how can we resolve this?
Well, I mean, come on, folks. What the reality is what I'm hearing on these questions is that I understand you have very great concerns about submitting current and pending support and the overlap, duplication, or capacity issue. So what we are most concerned about is really the amount of, and it's all important, it all must be disclosed, okay? Before someone says, oh, Jean said we don't have to report that. But in terms of the capacity issue, that part really has to be focused on the actual support that they have gotten. So meaning you've gotten funding from someone, it's going to another federal agency, it's going to take them 3 months to complete that scope. And then they have other awards. The bottom line is if your other support, not planned pending, gets to over 12 months, there's a problem. And it's going to be looked at very carefully. So that's what the space in which we're really looking at. And we have those issues all the time come up in panel where the faculty member says, or the reviewer says, look at this. They've got other support of here, 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 and here. When are they going to devote the time to this project? Because it's also included as pending on the current and pending support. And that's where NSF is that's what we're looking at this issue for. Other agencies are looking at current or other support for totally different reasons. They're looking for conflicts of interest, conflicts of commitment. What we tell you we are looking at is capacity and overlap duplication of really those definitely in play at the time.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we are running out of time, and I know we have a lot of questions that are still in the Q&A that we unfortunately won't be able to get to. But I do want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I do want to thank Jean Feldman, Samantha Hunter, and Beth Strausser for presenting and for answering your questions. I know they've been typing furiously away there in the Q&A. I want to thank you all and hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.